Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings. But this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018. And no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Chimamanda Adichie is the author of Mama's Sleeping Scarf, as well as many other wonderful books. This episode was guest hosted by Alicia Fernandez Miranda, who's the author of My What If Year, a memoir published by Zibby Books. Chimamanda was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world in 2015. In 2017, Fortune magazine named her one of the world's 50 greatest leaders. She is a member of both the Academy of Arts and Letters and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Her most recent work, Notes on Grief, an essay about losing her father, was published in 2021 to incredible acclaim and success. She also wrote Dear Ijewale, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions, which was published in March of 2015. Her first novel, Working Backwards Here, Purple Hibiscus, from 2003, won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and her second novel, Half of a Yellow Sun, 2006, won the Orange Prize. Her 2013 novel, Americana, won the U.S. National Book Critics Circle Award and was named one of the New York Times top 10 books of 2013. She has delivered 2 landmark TED Talks, her 2009 TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, and her 2012 TEDx Houston talk, We Should All Be Feminists, started a worldwide conversation about feminism and was published as a book in 2014. Chimamanda divides her time between the United States and Nigeria, where she was born, and where she leads an annual creative writing workshop. FYI, she graduated summa cum laude from Eastern Connecticut State University with a degree in communication and political science and has a master's degree in creative writing from Johns Hopkins University and a Master's of Arts degree in African History from Yale University. She was awarded a Hodder Fellowship at Princeton University for the 2005-2006 academic year and a fellowship at the Radcliffe Institute of Harvard University for the 2011 academic year. In 2008, she received a MacArthur Fellowship. Chimamanda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I basically elbowed out everybody to steal this episode from Zibby when she had a conflict with her time, because I'm such a fan of your fiction, of your essays. We Should All Be Feminists. So I was like, I don't even care what book this is. I want to do this interview with her.
That's so sweet.
And I didn't care that it was 8:30 at night here in Scotland. And I was going to be like, that's practically my bedtime. But I was like, no, we're doing this. So I am so excited that you are here to talk about Mama's Sleeping Scarf.
Yeah, it's exciting for me as well. I haven't really done many sort of promotional things for it, so it's still sort of exciting and fresh.
It's a lovely story. It's a perfect bedtime story. I was telling you before we started the interview that I made my kids read it with me before bed, even though they are almost 12, so maybe slightly out of the appropriate age. Well, not appropriate, but the kind of target age for this beautiful book. But it's such a great story. It's beautifully illustrated. And so Chino is like the perfect kid. She's so polite. I need to know if you were the perfect child, or if you are raising the perfect child, and that's how you get this example. Because I was amazed by her manners, frankly, throughout the story.
That's interesting. No. I was not the perfect child. I mean, I wish I could lie and say that I was, but, I feel like somebody would send you a message and be like, she's lying. Actually, it's so interesting that, does she have, okay, I guess so. I think my daughter is she's better at this age, she's 8. Okay. Than I was at 8.
Okay.
But it's interesting because she's actually quite fierce and she has her opinions and she's very good at saying no. But we do try to teach her. And in some ways also just the sort of very, I think, Nigerian, African idea that you you should be polite to adults, that kind of thing, but also to have a sense of autonomy. So I think, in some ways, I think that this book for me was about, I think, also just respecting a child's autonomy. So she gets to be, I mean, obviously within limits, because I just don't think that we should be our children's friends. I think we should be our children's parents.
Yeah.
But I think just within sort of a certain boundary, to have a sense of autonomy. So she has the scarf, and she just sort of does what she wants with it, because it's, safe and fun. And so I think my daughter is reasonably well-mannered.
I just, after reading it with my kids, I was like, do you see how much more often you should be saying please and thank you? This is obvious in this book. But it is, she definitely has this sense. And it's so funny, isn't it, with our kids? Because I always feel like when I see my kids have a little bit of fire, I'm always like, I love that you have that. I wish you were not deploying that weapon against me. Like, save it for the rest of the world. But just be obedient and listen to everything I say. Why can't that happen?
Oh my goodness, I feel exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. You want that for them because,
yes.
I think, you're preparing them for a world in which they will need that to survive, but you don't want them to, you don't want to see that when my daughter says,
exactly.
No.
Like, just save this, you're going to need it. But right now, please just get in the shower and go to bed. That's all I really want. So now you have written, I started going through your bio. You've written so much. You've been writing for such a long time, but this is your first children's book. So what made you decide to write this book, and how did the idea of the scarf kind of come to you?
Well, why did I decide to write this? Because I had a child. So before, my daughter is 8, like I said. So before I had her, I just wasn't interested in children's books. And I thought I wasn't the right person to write children's books because my vision is very dark. I'm interested in things like war and, injustice and all of those things. And then I had my daughter and we would read to her. So we started reading to her quite early. And I just started thinking about writing a book, because of her, for her. And then I remember this day that I'm holding her. She was still maybe, she wasn't maybe 1, maybe a little less than 1. And she pulls off my scarf, because I always have a scarf around my head when I sleep. And, it was just, one of those moments that it's so ordinary, but it's also so perfect. And I was so moved by it. I mean, having this child completely changed everything for me. So, I was one of those annoying mothers for whom every little thing became very precious, So I was like, this moment is precious. I'm going to forget it, And so I wrote it down because I make notes all the time. And then my parents, I was very close to my parents. My father died and my mother died a few months after. My father died in June of 2020. And it still is actually really difficult, really difficult. And so it was those two things, that memory, and then my parents dying, and this feeling of just being unmoored and wanting to, so I'm so desperately wanting to hold on to memory because of my parents. And they adored my daughter. I think my parents were not sure that I would have a child because I've sort of always been the strange, child. I have 5 siblings and they're all sort of, good, law-abiding people who have good jobs and who have children. And I was sort of the strange one. And I wasn't sure I wanted children. So I think when I had my daughter, my parents were so thrilled and so surprised. They worshipped her. And I wanted to remember that for myself and for her. So all of these things came together. And I think also just the idea of the scarf, I was thinking about, I'm really interested in that idea of making the small things of our lives familiar to everyone. And so I think that for most Black women, having something, a scarf, something around your hair when you're sleeping is normal. But I don't think it's normal for many people who are not Black.
Right.
And I kind of love the idea of celebrating this little thing, a scarf, but also just making it familiar to everyone. And so that's kind of all of that came together. And this happened, Mama's Sleeping Scarf.
It is so beautiful. And I think, did you find when you had your daughter and you started, I would presume, reading more children's books than maybe you had before? You have spoken your amazing TED Talk about the dangers of a single story. I mean, did you find that in children's literature? Did you find a good enough selection of stories that were reflecting the type of world you wanted your daughter to see and the things that were familiar to you? Or did you feel like having a child and maybe seeing what was out there, it was important for you to have a book where she saw someone in it that looked like her?
That's actually really And that's a good question, and it's sort of a good. It's in some ways it's both. So when I started reading children's books, and really I hadn't read any until I had her. I had no reason to. I just wasn't interested.
You were
I mean,
just picking up Dr. Seuss on the weekends.
I'm like, yeah, this is my weekend reading. That and that. But we would read to her, and two things. I realized that there's so many animal characters in children's books, which is fine, obviously. But I just thought, I wish we had more people. And so we would go to the library and I would go looking for books that had a wide range of people. I wanted her very early on to see the world as it is, and obviously also to see herself. And the other thing I noticed was how often the books that had Black children were about, sort of serious things. And I remember at her baptism, we had a baptism and we had a big party, and people gave her presents. And one of the presents was a book about a Black child who was going off to be an activist. And I just thought, activism is wonderful, but really, and I thought, how about the child just go off to, I don't know, explore and search for treasure or something? So for me, it was wanting to see more Black children in books who are doing absolutely ordinary things. It's not about fighting racism or all of those things. And also I missed, I think, seeing books that were ordinary. So I was telling a friend about this book, Mama's Sleeping Scarf, and he said to me, "Oh, that's so surprising. I expected the scarf to become magical." And I think it's the expectation we have about a lot of children's literature that something sort of extraordinary has to happen. You fly away on the scarf or the scarf, that sort of thing. And my daughter loves books like that. We're reading a book now where something about underpants. So somebody's underpants sort of takes on a life of its own and goes to different parts of the world. And she loves it. But I wanted something more ordinary, because I think there's so much beauty in just the ordinary. And so I think there's more work to be done in diversifying children's books, but I think it's much better today than it was, 20 years ago, for example. I think the publishing world is making an effort. Yeah.
So I guess my kids were born in 2011, but I have never really thought about it. But I'm trying to think of any books that I read them that had people in them. And I'm really struggling. We did a lot of Julia Donaldson because we're in the UK, a lot of Dr. Seuss. But mostly like giraffes who don't know how to dance or unicorns who poop rainbows.
My daughter loved that one. My daughter loved that giraffe.
I do love Giraffes Can't Dance, actually. That's such a cute book. But it's amazing. So you published We Should All Be Feminists in 2014. I've bought copies for almost everybody I know, probably at different stages of the last almost 10 years. And this was adapted from a TEDx talk you did in 2012. So it's been more than a decade. You've had a child in that period. What do you feel like has changed since then for you and for the kind of broader space that you're operating in?
Very little. No, I think
nothing.
Well. I find it increasingly interesting to talk about feminism because I think on the one hand, there's a lot of talk. I think that word feminism has become a lot more familiar to people. It's thrown around very often. But it just seems to me that the fundamental issues haven't really changed. I think, there's just so much that I'm still very dissatisfied with. I'm still angry about. I think that there's nowhere in the world today that we have real gender equality. Nowhere. And, God bless Norway, God bless Sweden and Denmark, but they do not, and Iceland, but they do not have gender equality. I've just been reading a book she's the wife of the president of Iceland, I think, or the prime minister. And it's so interesting. And she's Canadian. And, Iceland is often talked about as, this wonderful place where there's gender equality. And in this book, she talks to just ordinary Icelandic women.
Right.
And I was struck by how the issues are the same. This idea that women constantly have to compromise more. Women have to deal with a kind of, professional women have to deal with a kind of casual disrespect. That, always having to prove that you know what you're doing. And the only reason you have to do that is because you're a woman. And obviously, that the difficulty of wanting to, quote unquote, have it all, which is just such a strange thing for me because Yeah, it's a conversation about domestic life and domestic
Right.
work. And women are still doing the bulk of it. And, for many of them, it's unpaid. I mean, all of those things I think still interest me. And of course, being Nigerian, being African, I really care a lot about things that still haven't changed very much. Things like child marriage, female circumcision is decreasing in many parts of Africa, but still isn't gone. So there's still, I think we can all it's cool. And Beyonce did the thing on feminism, and I think that's good.
Sampled your song with T-shirts on the runway. Yeah, you've had a lot of pop culture feminism.
I have, and I like it because I think, I do think that talking about things makes a difference. But I think that the more we talk about something, the more that we make it front and center, then I think that the greater the likelihood of some kind of change. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done. So, am I happy at the state of women in the world? No.
And do you feel optimistic about the future your daughter is going into?
I want to say yes. I want to be optimistic because, this child is my life. But I realize I spend a lot of time worrying about her future. And so my latest obsession, and yes, I'm one of those annoyingly obsessive. I don't know what it was like for you, but obsession and anxiety came into my life the minute I had a child. So I'm constantly worrying about her.
Oh, yeah.
She's 8 years old, but now I'm worrying about, what's her adolescence going to be like? And now I'm really obsessing about social media because I've just read this book about the increase in anxiety and depression among young people. So that, the more they use Instagram, the more likely they are to be anxious and depressed. And I just find it so worrying. And I think also for me, the question is, how does one deal with it? Because on the one hand, you're not going to, I don't think it makes sense to say, I'm going to ban her from all social media because it's just not practical. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, I'm thinking, well, how do you sort of try and strike that balance where you're guarding her against depression, anxiety, and it's just, So am I optimistic? I usually am optimistic. I think maybe this is one of my dark days, actually. I know.
I'm always like, depends what day you catch me on. But I had twins, so I didn't have a lot of. There was definitely worry, anxiety, and just exhaustion. I think.
Oh my goodness, I can imagine.
But I would say now, about to turn 12, this is probably 50 to 75% of the conversations I have with other parents of kids my age about like, do they have a phone? When are you getting them a phone? What are the permissions they have? What can they use? What can they not? And it is very scary because it feels kind of unknown. Maybe social media is a nice dark topic for your next novel. There you go.
Oh, thank you, Alicia. I hadn't thought about that, but now that you've mentioned it, it's actually, I think it's too big a topic for me to even deal with in fiction. But so what I'm curious, what is your take? So your 12-year-olds, what do they have? What's your, do they,
I'm probably on the stricter edge, I would say. They don't have phones. They won't get phones until they need them, like when they're doing more independent things outside of me. And I'm very anti social media. Like I say that, and now everybody who's listening is like, but you're on Instagram 24 hours a day. So I'm working on my own social media. But for kids, I think I've told them 16. That's what I've said to them. I said, when you're 16, you can have it, but not before then. And you can hate me. You tell your therapist later, but I'm going to draw my line and I'm going to stick to it.
I love it. See, I'm taking notes. I'm just sort of asking women who have older kids because you're saying 16. I was telling my husband maybe 25, right?
That sounds great. I kept for a while when they were really little and a lot of this news is coming out. I just kept thinking like maybe there won't be maybe social media will somehow have disappeared by the time they're adolescents and I won't have to worry about it. But it doesn't look like I'm going to get that lucky. But it is all scary. It's all scary because it's like your heart walking around outside of your body. So, it's so terrifying having children and putting them out into the world. And so I'm glad we have books like your extremely just sweet, almost like a poem, like a lullaby book that I can still force them to listen to. And they have no choice.
Well, tell them I said I'm so sorry, and I send them my love.
They're listening to it every day. We're going to be like, it's Mama Sleeping Scarf time, guys. I was interested because you did mention that you typically write about kind of darker topics. Have you ever thought about writing a children's book on some of those darker things? The thing that came to mind when I was looking at everything you've written about recently was grief and grief for children, which is certainly a topic that I have struggled to find a lot of good books on kind of in my own journey with my kids. Would you write another children's book? Would you keep it nice and light, or do you think you might do something more serious next?
See, one of my things is never say never, because I've realized in my life I say never and then I end up doing it. but it's not something I don't know. I'm maybe at some point in the future, but not now, because I think that I'm still trying to make sense of grief for myself. Yeah. And I don't think I'm in a position to make it digestible for children. You know, my daughter, I was so worried for her when my father died and then my mother. And, I wasn't sure if, obviously they don't fully understand, because she looked sad. And then after a while, she said, when is Grandpa going to wake up again? And that just completely broke my heart, and I didn't realize she doesn't actually understand, Yeah. And so it's that I think to write for children about grief would be finding a way to let them know that Grandpa is never going to wake up again. And that's a lot,
Yeah, it is. Maybe that's why there aren't so many books. There are some.
Yeah, right.
There are some great resources, but my husband lost his father and brother in 2021 in very close succession. And it was, I found telling the kids actually maybe the most difficult part of that whole process. And so I was desperate because this is always my struggle. This has been my parenting strategy. Anything I don't want to talk about, I'm like, let's get a book about it. You want to learn about sex? Amazing. We're going to get this book. You read it. And then you ask me any questions you have, because I just think all the answers can be found in a book somewhere. So I'm still holding out for books to solve all of my parenting dilemmas for me. Maybe the ballad of social media disasters is coming and I won't have to worry about it. So tell me what's next for you. What are you working on now?
I am working on a novel. I don't usually talk about work in progress, but because I am, I think, in a kind of goodish place with the book. So, and I haven't written a novel in so long. And there are times when I'm thinking, wait, I actually wrote novels in the past. How? Right? I'm thinking, wait, I actually finished. So, I'm not even joking. So I'm in my study and usually I have my own book. So I look at them and I'm like, I wrote this, I finished this. How? Because it's been quite, And again, I blame my daughter. I blame my daughter for everything. I feel as though my creativity stopped the minute I got pregnant.
Wow.
Something happened to my brain. Something just happened. And I just could not create for a long time. Wow. Honestly. Yeah. Yeah.
Is this the first thing is this the first, I guess not the first thing you've written, or is the first thing you've written since having
it? Is the first it's the first fictional proper, right. I haven't written a novel in 10 years. Yeah. And, and I, even just remembering that just makes me really unhappy. So my publishers were celebrating the 10th anniversary of my novel. And I just thought, I don't want to hear it. Right? Because all it's saying to me is you haven't written a bloody novel in 10 years. But it's going well. So that's what I'm just really trying to focus on, not doing too much travel and just really, reading and writing.
What changed? What do you think it was? Because I had a big epiphany when my kids turned 8, actually. That was like a very important year for me, when I finally feel like I got some brain space back. Or did you just feel like you were ready finally to get back?
This is so good to hear. I'm just really happy to hear that. So
8 was the year for me.
Well, you did have twins, so that's like double trouble.
Exactly. But it was when they were settled in school. They were sort of building their own lives. They were like more or less functionally independent. And then, then I went off and I went and did all these internships and all the jobs I wanted to do when I was a kid. I quit my job as a CEO and I wrote a book about it, which is how I eventually found Zibby. So I didn't just go back to my creative practice. I kind of blew up my entire career and put it back together. But I do think it was 8 years old. It was like the magic birthday for me. And I know other mothers who have had similar things. So did you feel ready to write again? Or was there something else that was kind of spurring you on to work on a new novel?
I think I've been waiting to be ready, when I had her. And I have to say, when I got pregnant, I thought, I can handle this. I thought I'm going to, I'm pregnant, I'm going to write a novel. By the time she's 2, I'll have the first novel out. When she's 4, I'll have the next novel. I thought it was all, I thought, I can handle this. And And then I realized I couldn't because I really wanted to be ready. I would sit at my laptop. I had help. So it wasn't about, being over, even though, this is the thing. I did have help. So my mother came. And then after that, we had someone who would come in for a few hours. But here's the thing. I would be in my study and I would be staring at the camera, watching them.
Oh my God, we have all been there. We have all been there.
It was, right? And my husband would say to me, the whole point is that you have time to do your own work. I'm like, yeah, I know. But then I'm like, but I'm not sure I liked how she changed her. So, I mean, and also I like to joke and say that it might also be about being an older parent. Like, I had my daughter when I was 39, 30, yeah. And so I think maybe, because I was thinking maybe if I were, I don't know, 27, maybe I wouldn't be so obsessive. I don't know. But
so
I've been waiting to be ready. And it just slowly, I think in the past year, and I think maybe grief had something to do with it, because I did write a long essay about losing my father. And I mean, obviously it wasn't fiction, but it was also the first time I was kind of sort of mining my soul, getting inside myself. And I think that maybe that is part of what made me start to feel, okay, I really can create now. I can go into characters' heads, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's still, I'm so slow now. When I was, honestly, I'm just like, I finished novels in the past in like 3 years. And now I don't know how the hell I did it.
Well, no pressure, but I cannot wait to read what you do next. Now,
okay,
I'm ready. Feel free to send me some pages. I'm just happy to read it. But we like to finish up our interviews here on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books with any advice you might have for aspiring writers.
The most obvious thing is write. And I say that because lots of people want to write and they don't. I think people sometimes wait for the perfect time. There's never a perfect time. So I'm really a believer in doing the 30 minutes, just carve out some time. It doesn't matter how small. And I also personally believe, and I do this quite a bit, in keeping in touch with my own work. So if I've written 2 pages and I want to write and it's not happening, I go back and look at what I've done. It just, just to keep in touch with my own, just to remind myself, right? There are many stories I've started in the past years and never finished, but I go back and I look at them. So I'm in some ways, I'm saying to myself, this is doable, And I also really believe in reading as a way of teaching yourself, not just what you want to write, but what you don't want to write. So there's certain books I read and I like them, but I know I never want to write like that.
Yeah.
And then the books that I'm thinking, who the hell published this thing? And then the books I'm reading thinking I want to write like this person. And I read a lot of poetry when I'm writing fiction. I really think it just helps with language. You just sort of, you immerse yourself in language. And I think it's very beautiful. So yeah, so I'm very practical about writing. I think
these are really good tips, actually. I'm like going to go do all of these things now.
No, because you have to keep going. Sometimes it's a grind. You have to keep going. So I have this thing where I sit at my study table. But again, sometimes you end up looking at the camera and looking at the babysitter, and other times sometimes I shop for shoes, all of these things. But I'm
That's
at
productive.
my table.
You're clearing space in your brain for the ideas to flow.
Exactly.
I think shoe shopping is a very important part of the writing process.
Exactly.
Oh, this has been a true joy. Mama's Sleeping Scarf is out. You can buy it. I highly suggest you do. It is a beautiful book. I have just enjoyed this conversation even more than I thought I would, which is, I had pretty high expectations. So thank you so much, Chimamanda. I'm so grateful.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you. This was lovely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.